This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lizzie Driver. Bulfinch's Mythology, The Age of Fable, by Thomas Bulfinch. Chapter 38. Northern Mythology, Valhalla the Valkyrie. Northern Mythology. The stories which have engaged our attention thus far relate to the mythology of southern regions. But there is another branch of ancient superstitions which ought not to be entirely overlooked, especially as it belongs to the nations from which we, through our English ancestors, derive our origin. It is that of the northern nations, called Scandinavians, who inhabited the countries now known as Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and Iceland. These mythological records are contained in two collections called the Eddas, of which the oldest is in poetry and dates back to the year 1056. The more modern or prose Edda being of the date of 1640. According to the Eddas, there was once no heaven above nor earth beneath, but only a bottomless deep, and a world of mist in which flowed a fountain. 12 rivers issued from this fountain, and when they had flowed far from their source they froze into ice, and one layer accumulating over another, the great deep was filled up. Southward from the world of mist was the world of light. From this flowed a warm wind upon the ice and melted it. The vapours rose in the air and formed clouds, from which sprang Ymir, the frost giant, and his progeny, and the cow Audhumla, whose milk afforded nourishment and food to the giant. The cow got nourishment by licking the hoarfrost and salt from the ice. While she was one day licking the salt stones, there appeared at first the hair of a man, on the second day the whole head, and on the third the entire form endowed with beauty, agility, and power. This new being was a god, from whom and his wife, a daughter of the giant race, sprang the 3 brothers, Odin, Vali, and Ve. They slew the giant Ymir, and out of his body formed the earth, of his blood the seas, of his bones the mountains, of his hair the trees, of his skull the heavens, and of his brain clouds, charged with hail and snow. Of Ymir's eyebrows the gods formed Midgard, mid-earth, destined to become the abode of men. Odin then regulated the periods of day and night, and the seasons, by placing in the heavens the sun and moon, and appointing to them their respective courses. As soon as the sun began to shed its rays upon the earth, it caused the vegetable world to bud and sprout. Shortly after the gods had created the world, they walked by the side of the sea, pleased with their new work, but found that it was still incomplete, for it was without human beings. They therefore took an ash tree and made a man out of it, and they made a woman out of an elder, and called the man Ask and the woman Embla. Odin then gave them life and soul, Vili reason and motion, and Ve bestowed upon them the senses, expressive features, and speech. Midgard was then given them as their residence, and they became the progenitors of the human race. The mighty ash tree Yggdrasil was supposed to support the whole universe. It sprang from the body of Ymir, and had 3 immense roots, extending one into Asgard, the dwelling of the gods, the other into Jotunheim, the abode of the giants, and the third to Niflheim, the regions of darkness and cold. By the side of each of these roots is a spring, from which it is watered. The root that extends into Asgard is carefully tended by the 3 Norns, goddesses who are regarded as the dispensers of fate. They are Edur the past, Verandi the present, Skuld the future. The spring at the Jotunheim side is Ymir's well, in which wisdom and wit lie hidden, but that on Niflheim feeds the Adanidhog, darkness, which perpetually gnaws at the root. 4 hearts run across the branches of the tree and bite the buds. They represent the 4 winds. Under the tree lies Ymir, and when he tries to shake off its weight, the earth quakes. Asgard is the name of the abode of the gods, access to which is only gained by crossing the bridge Bifrost, the rainbow. Asgard consists of golden and silver palaces, the dwellings of the gods, but the most beautiful of these is Valhalla, the residence of Odin. When seated on his throne he overlooks all heaven and earth. Upon his shoulders are the ravens Hunin and Munin, who fly every day over the whole world, and on their return report to him all they have seen and heard. At his feet lie his two wolves, Geri and Freki, to whom Odin gives all the meat that is set before him, for he himself stands in no need of food. Mead is for him both food and drink. He invented the runic characters, and it is the business of the Norns to engrave the runes of fate upon a metal shield. From Odin's name, spelt Woden, as it sometimes is, came Wednesday, the name of the 4th day of the week. Odin is frequently called Alfadur, All-Father, but this name is sometimes used in a way that shows that the Scandinavians had an idea of a deity superior to Odin, uncreated and eternal. Of the joys of Valhalla. Valhalla is the greatest hall of Odin, wherein he feasts with his chosen heroes, all those who have fallen bravely in battle, for all who die a peaceful death are excluded. The flesh of the boar, Shrimina, is served up to them, and is abundant for all. For although this boar is cooked every morning, he becomes whole again every night. For drink the heroes are supplied abundantly with mead from the she-goat Hedrum. When the heroes are not feasting, they amuse themselves with fighting. Every day they ride out into the court or field and fight until they cut each other into pieces. This is their pastime, but when mealtime comes, they recover from their wounds and return to feast in Valhalla. The Valkyrie. The Valkyrie are warlike virgins, mounted upon horses and armed with helmets and spears. Odin, who is desirous to collect a great many heroes in Valhalla, to be able to meet the giants in a day when the final contest must come, sends down to every battlefield to make choice of those who shall be slain. The Valkyrie are his messengers, and their name means chosen of the slain. When they ride forth on their errand, their armour sheds a strange flickering light, which flashes up over the northern skies, making what men call the aurora borealis, or northern lights. Footnote: Gray's Ode, The Fatal Sisters, is founded on this superstition. Of Thor and the other gods. Thor, the Thunderer, Odin's eldest son, is the strongest of gods and men, and possesses 3 very precious things. The first is a hammer, which both the frost and the mountain giants know to their cost, when they see it hurled against them in the air, for it has split many a skull of their fathers and kindred. When thrown, it returns to his hand of its own accord. The second rare thing he possesses is called the Belt of Strength. When he girds it about him, his divine might is doubled. The third, also very precious, is his iron gloves, which he puts on whenever he would use his mallet efficiently. From Thor's name is derived our word Thursday. Frey is one of the most celebrated of the gods. He presides over rain and sunshine and all the fruits of the earth. His sister Freya is the most propitious of the goddesses. She loves music, spring, and flowers, and is particularly fond of the elves, fairies. She is very fond of love ditties, and all lovers would do well to invoke her. Bragi is the god of poetry, and his song records the deeds of warriors. His wife, Iduna, keeps in a box the apples which the gods, when they feel old age approaching, have only to taste of to become young again. Heimdall is the watchman of the gods, and is therefore placed on the borders of heaven to prevent the giants from forcing their way over the bridge Bifrost, the rainbow. He requires less sleep than a bird, and sees by night as well as by day 100 miles around him. So acute is his ear that no sound escapes him, for he can even hear the grass grow and the wool on a sheep's back. Of Loki and his progeny. There is another deity who is described as the culminator of the gods, and the contriver of all fraud and mischief. His name is Loki. He is handsome and well made, but of a very fickle mood and most evil disposition. He is of the giant race, but forced himself into the company of the gods, and seems to take pleasure in bringing them into difficulties, and in extracting them out of the danger by his cunning, wit, and skill. Loki has 3 children. The first is the wolf Fenris, the second the Midgard serpent, the third Hela, death. The gods were not ignorant that these monsters were growing up, and that they would one day bring much evil upon gods and men. So Odin deemed it advisable to send one to bring them to him. When they came, he threw the serpent into that deep ocean by which the earth is surrounded. But the monster had grown to such an enormous size that, holding his tail in his mouth, he encircles the whole earth. Hela he cast into Niflheim, and gave her power over 9 worlds or regions, into which she distributes those who are sent to her, that is, all who die of sickness or old age. Her hall is called Elvindina. Hunger is her table, starvation her knife, delay her man, slowness her maid, precipice her threshold, care her bed, and burning anguish forms the hangings of the apartments. She may easily be recognized, for her body is half flesh color and half blue, and she has a dreadfully stern and forbidding countenance. The wolf Fenris gave the gods a great deal of trouble before they succeeded in chaining him. He broke the strongest fetters as if they were made of cobwebs. Finally the gods sent a messenger to the mountain spirits, who made for them the chain called Gleipnir. It is fashioned of 6 things, viz., the noise made by the footfall of a cat, the beards of women, the roots of stones, the breath of fishes, the nerves, sensibilities, of bears, and the spittle of birds. When finished it was as smooth and soft as a silken string. But when the gods asked the wolf to suffer himself to be bound with this apparently slight ribbon, he suspected their design, fearing that it was made by enchantment. He therefore only consented to be bound with it, upon condition that one of the gods put his hand in his, Fenris's, mouth, as a pledge that the band was to be removed again. Tyr, the god of battles, alone had courage enough to do this. But when the wolf found that he could not break his fetters, and that the gods would not release him, he bit off Tyr's hand, and he has ever since remained one-handed. How Thor paid the mountain giant his wages. Once on a time, when the gods were constructing their abodes, and had already finished Midgard and Valhalla, a certain artificer came and offered to build them a residence so well fortified that they should be perfectly safe from the incursions of the frost giants and the giants of the mountains. But he demanded for his reward the goddess Freya, together with the sun and moon. The gods yielded to his terms, provided he would finish the whole work himself without anyone's assistance, and all within the space of 1 winter. But if anything remained unfinished on the first day of summer, he should forfeit the recompense agreed on. On being told these terms, the artificer stipulated that he should be allowed the use of his horse, Svadilfari, and this, by the advice of Loki, was granted to him. He accordingly set to work on the first day of winter, and during the night let his horse draw stone for the building. The enormous size of the stones struck the gods with astonishment, and they saw clearly that the horse did 1/2 more of the toilsome work than his master. Their bargain, however, had been concluded, and confirmed by solemn oaths, for without these precautions a giant would not have thought himself safe among the gods, especially when Thor should return from an expedition he had then undertaken against the evil demons. As the winter drew to a close, the building was far advanced, and the bulwarks were sufficiently high and massive to render the place impregnable. In short, when it wanted but 3 days to summer, the only part that remained to be finished was the gateway. Then sat the gods on their seats of justice, and entered into consultation, inquiring of one another who among them could have advised to give Freya away, or to plunge the heavens in darkness by permitting the giant to carry away the sun and the moon. They all agreed that no one but Loki, the author of so many evil deeds, could have given such bad counsel, and that he should be put to a cruel death if he did not contrive some way to prevent the artificer from completing his task and obtaining the stipulated recompense. They proceeded to lay hands on Loki, who in his fright promised upon oath that, let it cost him what it would, he would so manage matters that the man should lose his reward. That very night, when the man went with Svadilfari for building stone, a mare suddenly ran out of a forest and began to neigh. The horse thereat broke loose and ran after the mare into the forest, which obliged the man also to run after his horse, and thus between one and another the whole night was lost, so that at dawn the work had not made the usual progress. The man, seeing that he must fail of completing his task, resumed his own gigantic structure, and the gods now clearly perceived that it was in reality a mountain giant who had come amongst them. Feeling no longer bound by their oaths, they called on Thor, who immediately ran to their assistance, and lifting up his mallet, paid the workman his wages, not with the sun and moon, and not even by sending him back to Jotunheim, for which the first blow he shattered the giant's skull to pieces, and hurled him headlong into Niflheim. The recovery of the hammer. Once upon a time it happened that Thor's hammer fell into the possession of the giant Thrym, who buried it 8 fathoms deep under the rocks of Jotunheim. Thor sent Loki to negotiate with Thrym, but he could only prevail so far as to get the giant's promise to restore the weapon if Freya would consent to be his bride. Loki returned and reported the result of his mission, but the goddess of love was quite horrified at the idea of bestowing her charms on the king of the frost giants. In this emergency Loki persuaded Thor to dress himself in Freya's clothes, and accompanied him to Jotunheim. Thrym received his veiled bride with due courtesy, but was greatly surprised at seeing her eat for her supper 8 salmons and a full-grown ox, besides other delicacies, washing the whole down with 3 tons of mead. Loki, however, assured him that she had not tasted anything for 8 long nights, so great was her desire to see her lover, the renowned ruler of Jotunheim. Thrym had, at a length, the curiosity to peep under his bride's veil, but started back in a fright, and demanded why Freya's eyeballs glistened with fire. Loki repeated the same excuse, and the giant was satisfied. He ordered the hammer to be brought in, and laid on the maiden's lap. Thereupon Thor threw off his disguise, grasped his redoubted weapon, and slaughtered Thrym and all his followers. Frey also possessed a wonderful weapon, a sword, which would of itself spread a field with carnage whenever the owner desired it. Frey parted with this sword, but was less fortunate than Thor and never recovered it. It happened in this way. Frey once mounted Odin's throne, from whence one can see over the whole universe, and looking round saw far off in the giant's kingdom a beautiful maid, at the sight of whom he was struck with sudden sadness, insomuch that from the moment he could neither sleep nor drink nor speak. At last Skirnir, his messenger, drew his secret from him, and undertook to get in the maiden for his bride, if he would give him his sword as a reward. Frey consented and gave him the sword, and Skirnir set off on his journey and obtained the maiden's promise that within 9 nights she would come to a certain place and there wed Frey. Skirnir, having reported the success of his errand, Frey exclaimed, "Long is 1 night, long are 2 nights, but how shall I hold out 3? Shorter hath seemed a month to me, oft than of this longing time the half." So Frey obtained Gerda, the most beautiful of all women, for his wife, but he lost his sword. This story, entitled Skirnir 4, and the one immediately preceding it, Thrym's Quida, will be found poetically told in Longfellow's Poets and Poetry of Europe. End of chapter 38.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Thomas Wells. Bulfinch's Mythology, The Age of Fable. by Thomas Bulfinch. Chapter 39. Thor's Visit to Jotunheim, the Giants' Country. One day the god Thor, with his servant Thialfi, and accompanied by Loki, set out on a journey to the giants' country. Thialfi was of all men the swiftest of foot. He bore Thor's wallet, containing their provisions. When night came and they found themselves in an immense forest, and searched on all sides for a place where they might pass the night, and at last came to a very large hall, with an entrance that took the whole breadth of one end of the building. Here they lay down to sleep, but towards midnight were alarmed by an earthquake which shook the whole edifice. Thor, rising up, called on his companions to seek with him a place of safety. On the right they found an adjoining chamber, into which the others entered, but Thor remained at the doorway with his mallet in his hand, prepared to defend himself, whatever might happen. A terrible groaning was heard during the night, and at dawn of day Thor went out and found lying nearer him a huge giant, who slept and snored in the way that had alarmed them so. It said that for once Thor was afraid to use his mallet, and as the giant soon waked up, Thor contented himself with simply asking his name. "My name is Skrymir," said the giant, "but I need not ask thy name, for I know that thou art the god Thor. But what has become of my glove?" Thor then perceived that what they had taken overnight for a hall was the giant's glove, and the chamber where his two companions had sought refuge was the thumb. Skrymir then proposed that they should travel in company, and Thor consenting, they sat down to eat their breakfast. And when they had done, Skrymir packed all the provisions into one wallet, threw it over his shoulder, and strode on before them, taking such tremendous strides that they were hard to put it to keep up with him. So they traveled the whole day, and at dusk Skrymir chose a place for them to pass the night in under a large oak tree. Skrymir then told them he would lie down to sleep. "But take ye the wallet," he added, "and prepare your supper." Skrymir soon fell asleep and began to snore strongly, but when Thor tried to open the wallet, he found the giant had tied it up so tight he could not untie a single knot. At last Thor became wroth, and grasping his mallet with both hands, he struck a furious blow on the giant's head. Skrymir, awakening, merely asked whether a leaf had fallen on his head, and whether they had supped and were ready to go to sleep. Thor answered that they were just going to sleep, and so saying went and laid himself down under another tree. But sleep came not that night to Thor, and when Skrymir snored again so loud that the forest re-echoed with the noise, he arose, and grasping his mallet, launched it with such force at the giant's skull that it made a deep dent in it. Skrymir, awakening, cried out, "What's the matter? Are there any birds perched on this tree? I felt some moss from the branches fall on my head. How fares it with thee, Thor?" But Thor went away hastily, saying that he had just then woke, and that as it was only midnight, there was still time for sleep. He, however, resolved that if he had an opportunity of striking a third blow, it should settle all matters between them. A little before daybreak he perceived that Skrymir was again fast asleep, and again grasping his mallet, he dashed it with such violence that it forced its way into the giant's skull, up to the handle. But Skrymir sat up, and stroking his cheek, said, "An acorn fell on my head." "What? Art thou awake, Thor? Methinks it is time for us to get up and dress ourselves. But you have not now a long way before you to the city called Utgard. I have heard you whispering to one another that I am not a man of small dimensions. But if you come to Utgard, you will see there many men much taller than I. Wherefore, I advise you, when you come there, not to make too much of yourselves, for the followers of Utgard, Loki will not brook the boasting of such little fellows as you are. You must take the road that leads eastward, mine lies northward, so we must part here." Hereupon he threw his wallet over his shoulders and turned away from them into the forest, and Thor had no wish to stop him or to ask for any more of his company. Thor and his companions proceeded on their way, and towards noon descried a city standing in the middle of a plain. It was so lofty that they were obliged to bend their necks quite back on their shoulders in order to see the top of it. On arriving they entered the city, and seeing a large place before them with the door wide open, they went in, and found a number of men of prodigious stature, sitting on benches in the hall. Going further, they came before the king, Utgard Loki, whom they saluted with great respect. The king, regarding them with a scornful smile, said, "If I do not mistake me, that stripling yonder must be the god Thor." Then addressing himself to Thor, he said, "Perhaps thou mayest be more than thou appearest to be. What are the feats that thou and my fellows deem yourselves skilled in? For no one is permitted to remain here who does not, in some feat or another, excel all other men." "The feat that I know," said Loki, is to eat quicker than anyone else, and in this I am ready to give a proof against anyone here who may choose to compete with me." "That will indeed be a feat," said Utgard-Loki. "If thou performest what thou promised, it shall be tried forthwith." He then ordered one of his men who was sitting at the furthest end of the bench, and whose name was Logi, to come forward and try his skill with Loki. A trough filled with meat having been set on the hall floor, Loki placed himself at one end, and Logi at the other, and each of them began to eat as fast as he could, until they met in the middle of the trough. But it was found that Loki had only eaten the flesh, while his adversary had devoured both flesh and bone, and threw to the boot. All the company therefore adjudged that Loki was vanquished. Utgard-Loki then asked what feat the young man who accompanied Thor could perform. Thialfi answered that he would run a race with anyone who might be matched against him. The king observed that skill in running was something to boast of, but if the youth would win the match he must display great agility. He then arose and went with all who were present to a plain where there was a good ground for running on, and calling a young man named Hugi, bade him to run a match with Thialfi. In the first course Hugi so much outstripped his competitor that he turned back and met him not far from the starting place. Then they ran a second and third time, but Thialfi met with no better success. Utgard-Loki then asked Thor in what feats he would choose to give proofs of that prowess for which he was so famous. Thor answered that he would try a drinking match with anyone. Utgard-Loki bade his cupbearer to bring the large horn which his followers were obliged to empty when they had trespassed in any way against the law of the feast. The cupbearer having presented it to Thor, Utgard-Loki said, "Whoever is a good drinker will empty that horn at a single draught, though most men make 2 of it, but the most puny drinker can do it in 3. Thor looked at the horn, which seemed of no extraordinary size, though somewhat long. However, as he was very thirsty, he set it to his lips, and without drawing breath, pulled as long as deeply as he could, that he might not be obliged to make a second draught of it. But when he set the horn down and looked in, he could scarcely perceive that the liquor was diminished. After taking breath, Thor went to it again with all his might, but when he took the horn from his mouth, it seemed to him that he had drunk rather less than before, although the horn could now be carried without spilling. "How now, Thor?" said Utgard-Loki. "Thou must not spare thyself. If thou meanest to drain the horn at the 3rd draught, thou must pull deeply, and I must needs say that thou wilt not be called so mighty a man here as thou art at home, if thou showest no greater prowess in other feats than methinks will be shown in this." Thor, full of wrath, again set the horn to his lips, and did his best to empty it, but on looking he found the liquor was only a little lower, and so he resolved to make no further attempt, but gave back the horn to the cupbearer. "I now see plainly," said Utgard-Loki, "that thou art not quite so stout as we thought thee, but wilt thou try any other feat, though methinks thou art not likely to bear any prize away with thee hence." "What new trial hast thou to propose?" said Thor. "We have a very trifling game here," answered Utgard-Loki, "in which we exercise none but children. It consists in merely lifting my cat from the ground. Nor should I have dared to mention such a feat to the great Thor if I had not already observed that thou art by no means what we took thee for." As he finished speaking, a large gray cat sprang on the hall floor. Thor put his hand under the cat's belly and did his utmost to raise him from the floor. But the cat, bending his back, had, notwithstanding all Thor's efforts, only one of his feet lifted up, seeing which Thor made no further attempt. "This trial has turned out," said Utgard-Loki, "just as I imagined it would. The cat is large, but Thor is little in comparison to our men." "Little as ye call me," answered Thor. "Let me see who among you will come hither now I am in wrath and wrestle with me." "I see no one here," said Utgard-Loki, looking at the men sitting on the benches, "who would not think it beneath him to wrestle with thee. Let somebody, however, call hither that old crone, my nurse Eli, and let Thor wrestle with her if he will. She has thrown to the ground many a man not less strong than this Thor is." A toothless old woman then entered the hall, and was told by Utgard-Loki to take hold of Thor. The tale is shortly told. The more Thor tightened his hold on the crone, the firmer she stood. At length, after a very violent struggle, Thor began to lose his footing, and was finally brought down upon one knee. Utgard-Loki then told them to desist, adding that Thor had now no occasion to ask anyone else in the hall to wrestle with him, and it was also getting late. So he showed Thor and his companions to their seats, and they passed the night there in good cheer. The next morning, at the break of day, Thor and his companions dressed themselves and prepared for their departure. Utgard-Loki ordered a table to be set for them, on which there was no lack of victuals or drink. After the repast, Utgard-Loki led them to the gate of the city, and on parting asked Thor how he thought his journey had turned out, and whether he had met with any men stronger than himself. Thor told him that he could not deny but that he had brought great shame on himself. "And what grieves me most," he added, is that you will call me person of little worth. Nay, said Utgard-Loki, it behooves me to tell thee the truth, now thou art out of the city, which so long as I live and have my way thou shalt never enter again. And by my troth, had I known beforehand that thou hadst so much strength in thee, and thou would have brought me so near to a great mishap, I would not have suffered thee to enter this time. Know then that I could have all along deceived thee by my illusions. First in the forest, where I tied up the wallet with great iron wire, so that thou could not untie it. After this thou gavest me 3 blows with thy mallet. The first, though the least, would have ended my days had it fallen on me, but I slipped aside, and thy blows fell on the mountain, where thou wilt find 3 glens, one of them remarkably deep. These are the dents made by thy mallet. I have made use of similar illusions in the contests you have had with my followers. In the first, Loki, like hunger itself, devoured all that was set before him, but Loki was in reality nothing else than fire, and therefore consumed not only the meat, but the trough that held it. Hugi, with whom Thialfi contended in running, was thought, and it is impossible for Thialfi to keep pace with that. When thou that in thy turn didst attempt to empty the horn, thou didst perform, by my troth, a deed so marvellous that I had not seen it myself I should have never believed it. For one end of the horn reached the sea, which thou wast not aware of. But when thou comest to the shore thou wilt perceive how much the sea has sunk by thy draughts. Thou didst perform a feat no less wonderful by lifting up the cat, and to tell thee the truth, when we saw that one of his paws was off the floor, we were all of us terror-stricken. For what thou tookest for a cat was in reality the Midgard serpent that encompassed the earth. And he was so stretched by thee, he was barely long enough to enclose it between his head and tail. Thy wrestling with Ili was a most astonishing feat, for there was never yet a man, nor will ever be, whom the old age, for such in fact was Ili, will not sooner or later lay low. But now, as we are going to part, let me tell thee that it would be better for both of us if thou never come near me again, for shouldst thou do so, I shall again defend myself by other illusions, so that thou wilt only lose thy labour, and get no fame from the contest with me. On hearing these words, Thor in a rage laid hold of his mallet and would have launched it at him, but Utgard-Loki has disappeared, and when Thor would have returned to the city to destroy it, he found nothing around him but a verdant plain. End of chapter 39.
Chapter 40 of Bulfinch's Mythology. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Bulfinch's Mythology, The Age of Fable, by Thomas Bulfinch. Chapter 40. The Death of Baldur, the Elves, Runic Letters, Iceland, Teutonic Mythology, Nibelungen Lied. The Death of Baldur. Baldur the Good, having been tormented with terrible dreams indicating that his life was in peril, told them to the assembled gods, who resolved to conjure all things to avert from him the threatened danger. Then Frigga, the wife of Odin, exacted an oath from fire and water, from iron and all other metals, from stones, trees, diseases, beasts, birds, poisons, and creeping things, that none of them would do any harm to Baldur. Odin, not satisfied with all this, and feeling alarmed for the fate of his son, determined to consult the prophetess Angerboda, a giantess, mother of Fenris, Hela, and the Midgard serpent. She was dead, and Odin was forced to seek her in Hela's dominions. This descent of Odin forms the subject of Gray's fine ode beginning, "Uprose the king of men with speed, and saddled straight his coal-black steed." But the other gods, feeling that what Frigga had done was quite sufficient, amused themselves with using Baldur as a mark, some hurling darts at him, some stones, while others hewed at him with their swords and battle-axes, for do what they would, none of them could harm him. And this became a favorite pastime with them, and was regarded as an honor shown to Baldur. But when Loki beheld the scene he was sorely vexed that Baldur was not hurt. Assuming, therefore, the shape of a woman, he went to Fensalir, the mansion of Frigga. That goddess, when she saw the pretended woman, inquired of her if she knew what the gods were doing at their meetings. She replied that they were throwing darts and stones at Baldur, without being able to hurt him. "Aye," said Frigga, "neither stones nor sticks nor anything else can hurt Baldur, for I have exacted an oath from all of them." "What?" exclaimed the woman. "Have all things sworn to spare Baldur?" "All things," replied Frigga, except one little shrub that grows on the eastern side of Valhalla, and is called mistletoe, and which I thought too young and feeble to crave an oath from." As soon as Loki heard this, he went away, and resuming his natural shape, cut off the mistletoe, and repaired to the place where the gods were assembled. There he found Hodor standing apart, without partaking of the sports, on account of his blindness, and going up to him said, "Why dost thou not also throw something at Baldur?" "Because I am blind," answered Hodor, "and see not where Baldur is, and have, moreover, nothing to throw." "Come then," said Loki, "do like the rest, and show honor to Baldur by throwing this twig at him, and I will direct thy arm towards the place where he stands." Hodor then took the mistletoe, and under the guidance of Loki, darted it at Baldur, who, pierced through and through, fell down lifeless. Surely never was there witnessed, either among gods or men, a more atrocious deed than this. When Baldur fell, the gods were struck speechless with horror, and then they looked at each other, and all were of one mind to lay hands on him who had done the deed. But they were obliged to delay their vengeance out of respect for the sacred place where they were assembled. They gave vent to their grief by loud lamentations. When the gods came to themselves, Frigga asked who among them wished to gain all her love and goodwill. "For this," said she, "shall he have who will ride to Hel and offer Hela a ransom if she will let Baldur return to Asgard." Whereupon Hermod, surnamed the Nimble, the son of Odin, offered to undertake the journey. Odin's horse, Sleipnir, which has 8 legs and can outrun the wind, was then led forth, on which Hermod mounted and galloped away on his mission. For the space of 9 days and as many nights he rode through deep glens so dark that he could not discern anything, until he arrived at the river Gjöll, which he passed over on a bridge covered with glittering gold. The maiden who kept the bridge asked him his name and lineage, telling him that the day before 5 bands of dead persons had ridden over the bridge, and did not shake it as much as he alone. "But," she added, "thou hast not death's hue on thee. Why then ridest thou here on the way to Hel?" "I ride to Hel," answered Hermod, "to seek Baldur. Hast thou perchance seen him pass this way?" She replied, "Baldur hath ridden over Gjöll's bridge, and yonder lieth the way he took to the abodes of death." Hermod pursued his journey until he came to the barred gates of Hel. Here he alighted, girthed his saddle tighter, and, remounting, clapped both spurs to his horse, who cleared the gate by a tremendous leap without touching it. Hermod then rode on to the palace, where he found his brother Baldur occupying the most distinguished seat in the hall, and passed the night in his company. The next morning he besought Hela to let Baldur ride home with him, assuring her that nothing but lamentations were to be heard among the gods. Hela answered that it should now be tried whether Baldur was so beloved as he was said to be. "If, therefore," she added, "all things in the world, both living and lifeless, weep for him, then shall he return to life. But if any one thing speak against him or refuse to weep, he shall be kept in Hel." Hermod wrote back to Asgard and gave an account of all he had heard and witnessed. The gods upon this dispatched messengers throughout the world to beg everything to weep, in order that Baldur might be delivered from Hel. All things very willingly complied with this request, both men and every other living being, as well as earths and stones and trees and metals, just as we have all seen these things weep when they were brought from a cold place into a hot one. As the messengers were returning, they found an old hag named Thökt sitting in a cavern, and begged her to weep Baldur out of Hel. But she answered, "Thökt will wail with dry tears Baldur's bale fire. Let Hela keep her own." It was strongly suspected that this hag was no other than Loki himself, who never ceased to work evil among gods and men, so Baldur was prevented from coming back to Asgard. The gods took up the dead body and bore it to the seashore where stood Baldur's ship, Hringham, which passed for the largest in the world. Baldur's dead body was put on the funeral pile, on board the ship, and his wife Nanna was so struck with grief at the sight that she broke her heart, and her body was burned on the same pile as her husband's. There was a vast concourse of various kinds of people at Baldur's obsequies. First came Odin, accompanied by Frigga, the Valkyrie, and his ravens. Then Frey in his car drawn by Gullinbursti the boar. Heimdall rode his horse Gulltopp, and Freya drove in her chariot drawn by cats. There were also a great many frost giants and giants of the mountain present. Baldur's horse was led to the pile, fully caparisoned, and consumed in the same flames with his master. But Loki did not escape his deserved punishment. When he saw how angry the gods were, he fled to the mountain, and there built himself a hut with 4 doors, so that he could see every approaching danger. He invented a net to catch the fishes, such as fishermen have used since his time. But Odin found out his hiding place, and the gods assembled to take him. He, seeing this, changed himself into a salmon, and lay hid among the stones of the brook. But the gods took his net and dragged the brook, and Loki, finding he must be caught, tried to leap over the net. But Thor caught him by the tail and compressed it, so that salmons ever since have had that part remarkably fine and thin. They bound him with chains and suspended a serpent over his head, whose venom falls upon his face drop by drop. His wife Siguna sits by his side and catches the drops as they fall, in a cup, but when she carries it away to empty it, the venom falls upon Loki, which makes him howl with horror and twist his body about so violently that the whole earth shakes, and this produces what men call earthquakes. The Elves. The Edda mentions another class of beings, inferior to the gods, but still possessed of great power. These were called elves. The white spirits, or elves of light, were exceedingly fair, more brilliant than the sun, and clad in garments of a delicate and transparent texture. They loved the light, were kindly disposed to mankind, and generally appeared as fair and lovely children. Their country was called Alfheim, and was the domain of Freyr, the god of the sun, in whose light they were always sporting. The black or night elves were a different kind of creatures. Ugly, long-nosed dwarfs of a dirty brown color, they appeared only at night, for they avoided the sun as their most deadly enemy, because whenever his beams fell upon any of them, they changed them immediately into stones. Their language was the echo of solitudes, and their dwelling places subterranean caves and clefts. They were supposed to have come into existence as maggots produced by the decaying flesh of Ymir's body, and were afterwards endowed by the gods with a human form and a great understanding. They were particularly distinguished for a knowledge of the mysterious powers of nature, and for the runes which they carved and explained. They were the most skillful artificers of all created beings, and worked in metals and in wood. Among their most noted works were Thor's hammer and the ship Skidbladnir, which they gave to Freyr, and which was so large that it could contain all the deities with their war and household implements, but so skillfully was it wrought that when folded together it could be put into a side pocket. Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. It was a firm belief of the northern nations that a time would come when all the visible creation, the gods of Valhalla and Niflheim, the inhabitants of Jotunheim, Alfheim, and Midgard, together with their habitations, would be destroyed. The fearful day of destruction will not, however, be without its forerunners. First will come a triple winter, during which snow will fall from the 4 corners of the heavens. The frost will be very severe, the wind piercing, the weather tempestuous, and the sun impart no gladness. 3 such winters will pass away without being tempered by a single summer. 3 other similar winters will then follow, during which war and discord will spread over the universe. The earth itself will be frightened and begin to tremble. The sea leave its basin, the heavens tear asunder, and men perish in great numbers, and the eagles of the air feast upon their still quivering bodies. The wolf Fenris will now break his bands, the Midgard serpent rise out of her bed in the sea, and Loki, released from his bonds, will join the enemies of the gods. Amidst the general devastation, the sons of Muspelheim will rush forth under their leader Surtur, before and behind whom are flames and burning fire. Onward they ride over Bifrost, the rainbow bridge, which breaks under the horses' hoofs, but they, disregarding its fall, direct their course to the battlefield called Vigrid. Thither also repair the wolf Fenris, the Midgard serpent, Loki with all the followers of Hela, and the frost giants. Heimdall now stands up and sounds the Giallar horn to assemble the gods and heroes for the contest. The gods advance, led on by Odin, who engages the wolf Fenris, but falls a victim to the monster, who is, however, slain by Vidar, Odin's son. Thor gains great renown by killing the Midgard serpent, but recoils and falls dead, suffocated with the venom which the dying monster vomits over him. Loki and Heimdall meet and fight till they are both slain. The gods and their enemies having fallen in battle, Surtur, who has killed Freyr, darts fire and flames over the world, and the whole universe is burned up. The sun becomes dim, the earth sinks into the ocean, the stars fall from heaven, and time is no more. After this, Alfadur, the Almighty, will cause a new heaven and a new earth to arise out of the sea. The new earth, filled with abundant supplies, will spontaneously produce its fruits without labor or care. Wickedness and misery will no more be known, but the gods and men will live happily together. Runic letters. One cannot travel far in Denmark, Norway, or Sweden without meeting with great stones of different forms, engraven with characters called runic, which appear at first sight very different from all we know. The letters consist almost invariably of straight lines, in the shape of little sticks either singly or put together. Such sticks were in early times used by the northern nations for the purpose of ascertaining future events. The sticks were shaken up, and from the figures that they formed a kind of divination was derived. The runic characters were of various kinds. They were chiefly used for magical purposes. The noxious, or as they called them, the bitter runes, were employed to bring various evils on their enemies. The favorable averted misfortune. Some were medicinal, others employed to win love, etc. In later times they were frequently used for inscriptions, of which more than 1,000 have been found. The language is a dialect of the Gothic, called Norse, still in use in Iceland. The inscriptions may therefore be read with certainty, but hitherto very few have been found which throw the least light on history. They are mostly epitaphs on tombstones. Gray's Ode on the Descent of Odin contains an allusion to the use of runic letters for incantation. Facing to the northern clime, thrice he traced the runic rhyme, thrice pronounced in accents dread the thrilling verse that wakes the dead, till from out the hollow ground slowly breathed a sullen sound. The Skalds. The Skalds were the bards and poets of the nation, a very important class of men in all communities in an early stage of civilization. They are the depositaries of whatever historic lore there is, and it is their office to mingle something of intellectual gratification with the rude feasts of the warriors, by rehearsing, with such accompaniments of poetry and music as their skill can afford, the exploits of their heroes, living or dead. The compositions of the Skalds were called sagas, many of which have come down to us, and contain valuable materials of history, and a faithful picture of the state of society at the time to which they relate. Iceland. The Eddas and Sagas have come to us from Iceland. The following extract from Carlyle's lectures on heroes and hero worship gives an animated account of the region where the strange stories we have been reading had their origin. Let the reader contrast it for a moment with Greece, the parent of classical mythology. In that strange island, Iceland, burst up, the geologists say, by fire from the bottom of the sea, a wild land of barrenness and lava, swallowed many months of every year in black tempests, yet with a wild, gleaming beauty in summertime, towering up there stern and grim in the North Ocean, with its snow jökuls, mountains, roaring geysers, boiling springs, sulfur pools, and horrid volcanic chasms, like the waste, chaotic battlefield of frost and fire, where, of all places, we least looked for literature or written memorials. The record of these things was written down. On the seaboard of this wild land is a rim of grassy country, where cattle can subsist, and men, by means of them and of what the sea yields. And it seems they were poetic men, these, men who had deep thoughts in them, and uttered musically their thoughts. Much would be lost, had Iceland not been burst up from the sea, not been discovered by the Northmen. Teutonic Mythology. In the mythology of Germany proper, the name of Odin appears as Wotan. Freya and Frigga are regarded as one and the same divinity, and the gods are in general represented as less warlike in character than those in the Scandinavian myths. As a whole, however, Teutonic mythology runs along almost identical lines with that of the northern nations. The most notable divergence is due to modifications of the legends by reason of the difference in climatic conditions. The more advanced social condition of the Germans is also apparent in their mythology. The Nibelungen Lied. One of the oldest myths of the Teutonic race is found in the great national epic of the Nibelungen Lied, which dates back to the prehistoric era when Wotan, Frigga, Thor, Loki, and the other gods and goddesses were worshipped in the German forests. The epic is divided into two parts, the first of which tells how Siegfried, the youngest of the kings of the Netherlands, went to Worms to ask in marriage the hand of Kriemhild, sister of Gunther, king of Burgundy. While he was staying with Gunther, Siegfried helped the Burgundian king to secure as his wife Brunhild, queen of Island. The latter had announced publicly that he only should be her husband who could beat her in hurling a spear, throwing a huge stone, and in leaping. Siegfried, who possessed a cloak of invisibility, aided Gunther in these 3 contests, and Brunhild became his wife. In return for these services, Gunther gave Siegfried his sister, Kriemhild, in marriage. After some time had elapsed, Siegfried and Kriemhild went to visit Gunther, when the 2 women fell into a dispute about the relative merits of their husbands. Kriemhild, to exalt Siegfried, boasted that it was to the latter that Gunther owed his victories and his wife. Brunhild, in great anger, employed Hagen, liegeman of Gunther, to murder Siegfried. In the epic, Hagen is described as follows. Well grown and well compacted was that redoubted guest. Long were his legs and sinewy, and deep and broad his chest. His hair, that once was sable, with grey was dashed of late. Most terrible his visage, and lordly was his gait. Nibelungen Lied, stanza 1789. This Achilles of German romance stabbed Siegfried between the shoulders, as the unfortunate king of the Netherlands was stooping to drink from a brook during a hunting expedition. The second part of the epic relates how, 13 years later, Kriemhild married Etzel, king of the Huns. After a time, she invited the king of Burgundy, with Hagen and many others, to the court of her husband. A fearful quarrel was stirred up in the banquet hall, which ended in the slaughter of all of the Burgundians but Gunther and Hagen. These 2 were taken prisoners and given to Kriemhild, who with her own hand cut off the heads of both. For this bloody act of vengeance, Kriemhild was herself slain by Hildebrand, a magician and champion, who in German mythology holds a place to an extent corresponding to that of Nestor in the Greek mythology. The Nibelungen hoard. This was a mythical mass of gold and precious stones which Siegfried obtained from the Nibelungs, the people of the north whom he had conquered and whose country he had made tributary to his own kingdom of the Netherlands. Upon his marriage, Siegfried gave the treasure to Kriemhild as her wedding portion. After the murder of Siegfried, Hagen seized it and buried it secretly beneath the Rhine at Lochham, intending to recover it at a future period. The hoard was lost forever when Hagen was killed by Kriemhild. Its wonders are thus set forth in the poem. 'Twas as much as 12 huge wagons in 4 whole nights and days could carry from the mountain down to the salt sea bay, though to and fro each wagon thrice journeyed every day. It was made up of nothing but precious stones and gold, were all the world bought from it, and down the value told, not a mark the less would there be left than erst there was, I ween. Nibelungen Lied, 19. Whoever possessed the Nibelungen hoard were termed Nibelungers. Thus, at one time, certain people of Norway were so called. When Siegfried held the treasure, he received the title King of the Nibelungers. Wagner's Nibelungen Ring. Though Richard Wagner's music drama of the Nibelungen Ring bears some resemblance to the ancient German epic, it is a wholly independent composition, and was derived from various old songs and sagas, which the dramatists wove into one great harmonious story. The principal source was the Volsunga saga, while lesser parts were taken from the Elder Edda and the Younger Edda, and others from the Nibelungen Lied, the Eklund Lied, and other Teutonic folklore. In the drama there are at first only 4 distinct races, the gods, the giants, the dwarfs, and the nymphs. Later, by a special creation, there come the Valkyrie and the heroes. The gods are the noblest and highest race, and dwell first in the mountain meadows, later in the palace of Valhalla on the heights. The giants are a great and strong race, but lack wisdom. They hate what is noble and are enemies of the gods. They dwell in caves near the earth's surface. The dwarfs, or Nibelungs, are black, uncouth pygmies, hating the good, hating the gods. They are crafty and cunning, and dwell in the bowels of the earth. The nymphs are pure, innocent creatures of the water. The Valkyrie are daughters of the gods, but mingled with a mortal strain. They gather dead heroes from the battlefields and carry them to Valhalla. The heroes are children of the gods, but also mingled with a mortal strain. They are destined to become at last the highest race of all, and to succeed the gods in the government of the world. The principal gods are Wotan, Loki, Donner, and Fro. The chief giants are Fafnir and Fasolt, brothers. The chief dwarfs are Alberic and Mime, brothers, and later Hagen, son of Alberic. The chief nymphs are the Rhine daughters, Flosshilda, Woglinde, and Welgunda. There are 9 Valkyrie, of whom Brunhild is the leading one. Wagner's story of the ring may be summarized as follows. A hoard of gold exists in the depths of the Rhine, guarded by the innocent Rhine maidens. Alberic the dwarf forswears love to gain this gold. He makes it into a magic ring. It gives him all power, and he gathers by it a vast amount of treasures. Meanwhile, Wotan, chief of the gods, has engaged the giants to build for him a noble castle, Valhalla, from whence to rule the world, promising in payment Freya, goddess of youth and love. But the gods find they cannot spare Freya, as they are dependent on her for their immortal youth. Loki, called upon to provide a substitute, tells of Alberic's magic ring and other treasure. Wotan goes with Loki, and they steal the ring and the golden hoard from Alberic, who curses the ring and lays the curse on all who shall henceforth possess it. The gods give the ring and the treasure to the giants as a substitute for Freya. The curse at once begins. One giant, Fafnir, kills his brother to get all, and transforms himself into a dragon to guard his wealth. The gods enter Valhalla over the Rainbow Bridge. This ends the first part of the drama, called the Rhinegold. The second part, the Valkyrie, relates how Wotan still covets the ring. He cannot take it himself, for he has given his word to the giants. He stands or falls by his word. So he devises an artifice to get the ring. He will get a hero race to work for him and recover the ring and the treasures. Sigmund and Sieglinde are twin children of this new race. Sieglinde is carried off as a child and is forced into marriage with Hunding. Sigmund comes and unknowingly breaks the law of marriage, but wins Nothung, the great sword, and a bride. Brunhild, chief of the Valkyrie, is commissioned by Wotan at the instance of Fricka, goddess of marriage, to slay him for his sin. She disobeys and tries to save him, but Hunding, helped by Wotan, slays him. Sieglinde, however, about to bear the free hero, to be called Siegfried, is saved by Brunhild and hid in the forest. Brunhild herself is punished by being made a mortal woman. She is left sleeping on the mountains with a wall of fire around her, which only a hero can penetrate. The drama continues with the story of Siegfried, which opens with a scene in the smithy between Mime the dwarf and Siegfried. Mime is wielding a sword, and Siegfried scorns him. Mime tells him something of his mother, Sieglinde, and shows him the broken pieces of his father's sword. Wotan comes and tells Mime that only one who has no fear can remake the sword. Now Siegfried knows no fear, and soon remakes the sword Nothung. Wotan and Alberic come to where the dragon Fafnir is guarding the ring. They both long for it, but neither can take it. Soon Mime comes, bringing Siegfried with the mighty sword. Fafnir comes out, but Siegfried slays him. Happening to touch his lips with the dragon's blood, he understands the language of the birds. They tell him of the ring. He goes and gets it. Siegfried now has possession of the ring, but it is to bring him nothing of happiness, only evil. It is to curse love and finally bring death. The birds also tell him of Mime's treachery. He slays Mime. He longs for someone to love. The birds tell him of the slumbering Brunhilde, whom he finds and marries. The Dusk of the Gods portrays at the opening the three Norns or fates weaving and measuring the thread of destiny. It is the beginning of the end. The perfect pair, Siegfried and Brunhild, appear in all the glory of their life, splendid ideals of manhood and womanhood. But Siegfried goes out into the world to achieve deeds of prowess. He gives her the Nibelungen ring to keep as a pledge of his love till his return. Meanwhile, Alberic also has begotten a son, Hagen, to achieve for him the possession of the ring. He is partly of the Gibichung race, and works through Gunther and Gutrune, half-brother and half-sister to him. They beguile Siegfried to them, give him a magic draught which makes him forget Brunhild and fall in love with Gutrune. Under this same spell, he offers to bring Brunhild for wife to Gunther. Now is Valhalla full of sorrow and despair. The gods fear the end. Wotan murmurs, "Oh, that she would give back the ring to the Rhine." But Brunhild will not give it up. It is now her pledge of love. Siegfried comes, takes the ring, and Brunhild is now brought to the Rhine castle of the Gibichungs. But Siegfried, under the spell, does not love her. She is to be wedded to Gunther. She rises in wrath and denounces Siegfried. But at a hunting banquet, Siegfried is given another magic draught, remembers all, and is slain by Hagen by a blow in the back, as he calls on Brunhild's name in love. Then comes the end. The body of Siegfried is burned on a funeral pyre, a grand funeral march is heard, and Brunhild rides into the flames and sacrifices herself for love's sake. The ring goes back to the Rhine daughters, and the old world of the gods of Valhalla, of passion and sin, is burnt up with flames, for the gods have broken moral law and coveted power rather than love, gold rather than truth, and therefore must perish. They pass, and a new era, the reign of love and truth, has begun. Those who wish to study the differences in the legends of the Nibelungen Lied and the Nibelungen Ring, and the way in which Wagner used his ancient material, are referred to Professor W. C. Sawyer's book on Teutonic Legends in the Nibelungen Lied and the Nibelungen Ring, where the matter is treated in full detail. For a very thorough and clear analysis of the ring as Wagner gives it, with a study of the musical motifs, probably nothing is better for general readers than the volume The Epic of Sounds by Frida Winworth. The more scholarly work of Professor Lavignac is indispensable for the student of Wagner's dramas. There is much illuminating comment on the sources and materials in Legends of the Wagner Drama by J. L. Weston. End of Chapter 40.